I knew the honeymoon phase was over when I walked into the break room and found my name sharpied off the coffee club list. Spelled wrong, no less, Sandra. Bold move for a team that still couldn't tell the difference between an NDA and a napkin doodle. But that was the energy lately. My desk was right next to the server closet and 2 forgotten potted plants, which felt about right. 5 years of building a bulletproof compliance ecosystem. I was treated like a sentient paperclip. And yet, I liked it that way. While the company's execs were out hosting quarterly ego parades for our would-be investors, I was the ghost in the spreadsheets, the keeper of keys, the last stop before anything legally binding got blessed. My systems didn't shout, they just worked. Quietly, obsessively, down to the last nested countersignature. Every compliance audit we passed, me. Every trust key rotated on schedule, me. Every single internal attestation, also me. No one ever noticed, which was the point. I wasn't in it for the glory. I was in it for the control. And maybe, if I'm honest, a tiny bit for the silent power of watching directors scramble when they forgot their quarterly disclosures and had to email me at 11:49 p.m. begging for mercy. Not that I ever made a scene. I just clicked a few boxes, dropped the receipt in the right vault, let them think legal handled it. Outside of work, I had a little side consultancy I ran in the evenings. Nothing wild, just helping scrappy nonprofits and overwhelmed small businesses tighten their compliance frameworks. Stuff their auditors would never care about until it became an IRS nightmare. It was clean, harmless, and completely non-competitive. Hell, it kept me sane. Try explaining attestation sequencing to a 28-year-old COO who thinks dual-key escrow is something to do with apartment rentals. You'll need a hobby too. By the way, if you've made it this far and you're enjoying the ride, go ahead and tap that subscribe button. I know, everyone says it, but it really does keep the stories coming and the coffee flowing for the team. A like wouldn't hurt either. Trust me, it motivates more than any HR memo ever could. Anyway, back to the brink. We were days out from a major private equity diligence cycle. $180 million on the line. Every team was on high alert. Deadlines were being flung like dodgeballs in a third-grade gym class. The new COO, let's call him Travis, because of course that was his name, was strutting around with his Bluetooth earpiece like it was a sheriff's badge, barking orders he barely understood. Been brought in 6 months ago to modernize operations, which apparently meant turning the office into a PowerPoint farm and replacing every quietly competent woman over 40 with a fratty guy named Chad who called Excel that green app. To his credit, Travis knew how to perform confidence. But performing competence, different skill set entirely. The first time we met, he asked me what my value add was. I told him, the reason our cap table isn't a subpoena. He laughed, confused. I didn't. Still, I kept my head down. The diligence process was already a mess. 3 deal rooms, 2 redundant vendor reviews, and 1 panicked email chain about who had access to the escrow instructions. I held the only login for the Keystone signature, the final digital attestation required to validate compliance before the buyer released funds. That wasn't bravado. That was system design. It architected the entire flow 5 years ago. Dual signer verification, biometric backup, time-locked access, and a legal framework that required my countersignature on all high-tier attestations. It was tucked away in the protocol binder no one ever read. Because why would they? Sandra always handled it, and I still was. Quietly, methodically, making sure every single flag was green. I was prepping for the 9:00 a.m. submission window. I'd already staged the release, filed the trust packet, and queued the escrow validation files for final sign-off. We were on track, barely. But I could feel the tremor starting. Little things, a weird delay in permissions escalations, a missing timestamp on one of the finance director's filings. Someone had tried to override my admin privileges on the back end and failed, clumsily. The system flagged it as a non-critical anomaly, but I knew better. Someone was poking around in places they didn't understand. And whenever that happened, it meant one thing. Someone up the chain thought they were smarter than the architecture. They weren't. And I was about to find out just how dangerously dumb they were willing to get. It happened in the glass coffin they called the executive strategy room. Long, soulless table, chairs that looked ergonomic but sat like repentant stools. One of those giant wall screens that always had a single next slide button blinking like a lie detector waiting to go off. Travis, our Bluetooth-slinging COO, strutted in with the energy of a man who thought HR was a weapon and charisma was a spreadsheet filter. "Let's jump right in," he chirped like a sitcom character trying to sound like a general. Then he dropped it. "We've become aware that Sandra's engaged in a little extracurricular consulting." And there it was. No preamble, no warning, no HR sit down. Just a room full of executives, a few investor reps, and Travis with that smug smile that said gotcha. He clicked the remote, and up popped a screenshot of my personal business website, clean, basic, password protected, featuring nothing more controversial than the phrase helping nonprofits navigate audit chaos. A blip. An ant next to the corporate mammoth we were in. I blinked once. Twice. Sipped my coffee. Black, no sugar. Unlike the room, we take compliance seriously here, Travis continued, spinning irony into a fine silk noose. And this activity raises questions about loyalty, about focus, about priorities. Someone to his left shifted uncomfortably. I think it was the director of ops he knew I'd covered for his last-minute attestation error the week prior. Not that he'd speak up now. The room had a scent, nervous leather and cowardice. Travis leaned forward like he was doing me a favor. "So Sandra, this is simple. Pick a paycheck, us or them." Silence. Even the blinking cursor on the wall screen seemed to stop. I met his eyes dead flat, no reaction, no explosion, just a moment of surgical clarity. I closed my laptop. Slowly, deliberately. Snapped the latch with 2 fingers like a guillotine. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out my badge, and laid it gently on the table. Didn't toss it, say a word. Just stood and walked out. Left foot, right foot, no tremble, no falter. I didn't even hear the murmurs behind me until I was halfway down the corridor. They probably expected me to cry or argue or beg for clarification like they'd seen in so many HR drama webinars. Instead, I gave them what no one in that room knew how to handle. Nothing. Because here's the truth, they thought they had me cornered. They thought evening gig meant I was distracted, that I was fragile, that I was a liability. What they didn't think about, because they never bothered to understand it, was what I actually held. They hadn't read the governance documents. They hadn't traced the access logs. They hadn't reviewed the attestation protocol I'd designed, buried in the operations binder under critical escrow dependencies. They definitely hadn't realized I was the sole remaining countersigner on the compliance attestation chain, with a dual key requirement that couldn't be overridden without triggering a legal invalidation flag. They thought they'd fired a note-taker. What they'd actually done was decapitate the one person standing between them and a voided diligence pipeline. But they wouldn't know that. Not yet. Right now, they were probably high-fiving in the break room, swapping war stories about how they handled the liability before the investor deadline. Travis was probably pacing around like a gladiator with a LinkedIn quote to post. And I was already drafting the email to my personal counsel. Quietly, strategically, and with a level of calm only someone who built the bomb could feel while watching amateurs throw matches near the fuse. They wanted a purge. They were about to get a baptism by fire. They wouldn't even realize it until it was too late to stop it. I didn't file a resignation. There was no exit interview, no HR ticket, no cheery farewell email with a subject line like onward and upward. I didn't pack a desk plant or print out a LinkedIn post with 47 hashtags and a photo of a branded coffee mug. I just walked out of that glass tomb, badge left on the strategy table like a communion wafer nobody dared touch. Let them figure it out. The real trick wasn't leaving. It was how I left, my access, still live, my credentials, still authenticated. The system, after all, ran on protocol, not vibes. There was no trigger to auto-deactivate Sandra just because some Bluetooth-wearing moron in a blazer got cocky. At 5:47 p.m., I got the email confirming the board minutes had been uploaded to the diligence portal. They were moving forward, too forward. At 6:12 p.m., a document pinged through my private account from my personal attorney, Laurel, Godsend, Pitbull, and not incidentally, the woman who had helped me craft my consultancy's LLC operating agreement 3 years ago. It contained a finalized notice of disengagement, quiet, airtight, time-stamped. Laurel had a flair for strategic exits. The paperwork was prepped weeks in advance, in case something like this ever happened, because I'd seen it before. A woman does good work, stays quiet, and eventually makes the wrong man feel small. That's when they come for your title, your access, your worth. I wasn't going to wait for the boot heel. I was going to pivot. By 7 p.m., I had a signed copy back in Laurel's hands. Nothing messy, nothing public, just a clean, official notification that I would no longer be renewing access to any compliance obligations under my consultancy's private license. As of midnight, my trust key credentials, personally owned, legally distinct, would expire. Here's the part they never understood. I wasn't just a note-taker with a checklist. I was the co-signer on every compliance attestation above Level 2 clearance. When they implemented the dual-key attestation model 3 years ago, it quietly embedded myself as one of the 2 required signatories. The other was the general counsel, who never logged in without my guidance. I was the keystone, the counterweight, the final yes, but they didn't read the logs, didn't track that my cryptographic signature was embedded across every finalized control declaration. Didn't know that when I walked out, I took half the lock with me and left the other half spinning uselessly in place. By 9:45 p.m., I watched the system's clock tick from my home terminal, my own machine, my own network. One of my old scripts, legal to run, no conflict, tracked the compliance chain's heartbeat. Everything was normal, nothing alerted, no fireworks, just one tiny flag at the bottom of the page. Sandra McAlary credential validity set to expire in 02/14/07. Midnight would come, and they'd lose access to the very thing they thought was automated. Because unlike their Friday happy hour plans and investor roundtables, compliance doesn't care about charisma. It cares about keys. And mine were about to vanish. I made tea, Ruibos, no caffeine, no panic, and pulled out the other file Laurel had sent, an engagement draft, not with my old firm, with someone else, someone bigger, someone with teeth and lawyers, and a reason to take interest in a small consultancy that just happened to know the full architecture of a mismanaged diligence chain on the verge of implosion. I didn't sign it yet, but I read it. Twice. Then set it down and watched the terminal blink calmly in the corner of my screen, counting down the final hours of a system built too well to scream, too rigid to improvise, and too dependent on a ghost they thought they could delete. Let them sleep. Tomorrow, the silence would break. Travis made his announcement the next morning like a quarterback who just fired the water boy and thought it counted as strategy. Slack was buzzing before 9 a.m., full of little claps and awkward emoji reactions from people who were either too junior to know better or too terrified to ask questions. Team, he wrote, as part of our continued optimization efforts, we've made the decision to streamline several internal roles, including compliance functions that have now been operationalized. Operationalized. Jesus. You could practically hear the PowerPoint animations. He said it like he'd replaced me with an app, like 5 years of architecture and interlocked governance could be copied into a Google Sheet and blessed with a shrug. Like my exit was a planned evolution, not a blindfolded leap off a legal cliff. Meanwhile, Board was circling like well-fed sharks, thrilled by his sudden initiative. One of the senior partners, Wells, a guy who looked like he ironed his face along with his shirt, sent a 2-word reply to the announcement. Good cadence. Good cadence. For a decision that gutted the one person who knew what the term chain of custody for digital escrow artifacts even meant in real English. Travis was in rare form. He threw together a last-minute diligence fast-track sprint, legal to finalize attestations by close of day, and posted a photo of the war room setup like he was launching a rocket. We're tightening bolts, he said to the room. Nothing Sandra did can't be done faster by systems. We've got AI tools for this stuff now. Let's go. I wasn't there to see it, of course, but I know how he works. Loud, quick, shallow. And sure enough, things looked fine for about 2 hours. The checklist for the diligence portal populated. Docs loaded. A few items even auto-validated using my earlier inputs from the week. Everything was green enough to someone with Travis's attention span. But then the system started whispering. Not shouting, just subtle resistance. A dual signer prompt that timed out. A red flag on an automated keychain audit. Signer unreachable. Esmic Alari, credential expired. At first, they assumed it was a syncing issue. IT rebooted the local portal instance. Legal intern repinged the attestation vault, then copied and pasted my name into the field again, like maybe spelling would change access. The COO didn't even blink. It's cached, he told the room. These things just need to reset. Sandra probably forgot to log out properly. Let's keep rolling. And they did. They pushed more files. Finalized timestamps. clicked ready for signature on 5 critical compliance artifacts, each one now hovering in limbo, waiting for a ghost key that no longer existed. To Travis, it looked like forward progress, a strong move, a cleanup job done right. He paraded into the midday board sink like Caesar back from Gaul, said things like lean efficiency and digitally native compliance. No one asked where the signatures were. Not yet. The screen in the war room stayed mostly green, after all. It was easy to miss the soft red pulse in the corner. Attestation pending, dual signature required. Easy to ignore the timestamp that ticked closer to the cutoff. Easier still to believe everything was under control, because Travis believed it. He hadn't just underestimated the system. He'd underestimated the person who built it. And while he smirked through investor calls and smiled at board approvals, the engine beneath him was bleeding signal. Quietly. Precisely. Every checkbox he forced through just made the silence louder. Every push closer to the finish line was like sprinting with a parachute full of rocks. Because compliance doesn't care about confidence. It cares about keys. And I wasn't turning mine. It started with a non-response. Legal tried to finalize the Tier 1 compliance files at 3:26 p.m., just a routine end-of-cycle wrap before the 9:00 a.m. investor snapshot. 10 forms, 5 vaults, 3 key sign-offs. Should have taken 20 minutes. 30. Someone forgot their login token again. Instead, they hit no attester. On everything. The term wasn't a red flag at first. Just one of those vague system errors that showed up like a paper jam light. Annoying, ignorable, probably temporary. So they did what legal always does when tech gets cranky. They pinged IT. System says no attester, one of the counsels typed. Can you reboot the compliance vault instance? On it came the reply from IT. Reboot. Refresh. Try still, no attester. IT opened the access logs, tried to backdoor into the attestation module through admin override, got slapped with a signature pairing failure. Looks like Sandra's credential expired, one tech muttered, half listening to music through one AirPod. Guess it didn't transition clean. Someone from legal, maybe Harlan or Devon, waved a hand dismissively. So reset it. Can't, the tech said without looking up. It's not local. What? It's not our key. It's tied to an external signature chain. Her consultancy's license. That was the first ripple, barely visible, like wind brushing the top of a still lake. Legal blinked. Well, just issue a replacement, Harlan tried. Create a new signer. The room went still for half a beat longer than usual. The IT lead rolled back his chair and cleared his throat. You can't. The governance module is locked. It requires dual signer input to change attester roles. It's the general counsel. The other was he didn't finish. Because just then, a junior counsel, Annika, barely a year out of law school, always hovering near the sidelines, spoke up without turning from her monitor. Why did she still have access to the trust key vault last week? The room snapped to her. What? Harlan asked, tight. I mean, if she was streamlined, why didn't anyone remove her from the signer role? Her credential was still active 4 days ago. Vault shows her last login as Monday night. She accessed the compliance key store, ran a vault trace, then nothing. Silence. Can we escalate override? Someone asked. Nope, said the IT lead, now clearly sweating. The system's designed to prevent unilateral override of Keystone credentials. You'd need both signers. We only have one now. But she's not with the company, legal pushed. She left. She didn't resign, she just walked out. Same difference. Not to the system. Tension in the room coiled like a live wire. That was when Devon, older guy, law school with half the board, steepled his fingers and muttered, You're telling me we can't close Attestation because we fired the only other signer? No one answered. Someone refreshed the diligence portal. Same flashing message. Attestation pending dual signature incomplete. Keystone signer, Esmik Alari, credential invalid. Override, prohibited. It was 4:47 p.m. 5:12 p.m. Legal was huddled in a breakout room with 3 IT reps, 2 interns scrubbing email logs for any evidence Sandra had formally resigned, and 1 guy from risk management pacing like his pacemaker was connected to the office Wi-Fi. They couldn't find a resignation letter. No exit interview, no HR case ID, no documentation trail at all. She ghosted, someone muttered. No, Annika corrected. She planted a mine and stepped back. And that's when the realization hit, not like a thunderclap, but like the slow hiss of a gas leak finally reaching flame. Sandra didn't just forget to log out. She designed the lock, and the key, it wasn't theirs to turn anymore. By 8:45 a.m., the war room wasn't buzzing, it was drowning. The diligence portal's UI, normally a calm sea of green check marks and time-stamped confirmations, had gone full horror show. At the top of the screen, bold and blinking in a shade of red that felt personal, were 2 words: pending attestation. Every compliance file, every controls artifact, every certification meant to signal we're clean, we're safe, we're investable was locked in a frozen queue. The system had tried to push them forward, bless them, approve them. But without both signatures, nothing moved. They'd queued for auto-processing at midnight. No action was taken. At 2:14 a.m., Sandra's expired credential triggered a failsafe. Signer invalid. The system had been trying to escalate ever since, but there was no escalation protocol for you terminated the only person who can sign the deal. Inside the room, caffeine was evaporating faster than answers. A whiteboard still bore Travis's 7 o'clock a.m. strategy bullet points. Final legal push, buyer confidence touchpoint, close attestation flow. Underneath that, someone had scribbled WTF is no attester in black expo like it was a riddle for God. At 8:46, the buyer's external counsel called. It wasn't a courtesy call. It was that kind of call. Devin answered, tried to sound casual. Hey, yeah, we're seeing a bit of latency on our cut the crap, the voice snapped. Why is the Keystone signer not appearing in the ledger? Devin blinked, speechless. The attestation chain is incomplete, the voice continued. You have no legal validation for your controls. Our audit committee is staring at a blinking red bar that says your compliance authority has been revoked. You have exactly a pause, rustling paper, 14 minutes before we're past the deadline, and this becomes a failed submission. Harlan motioned wildly to IT, mouthing get Travis. Devin stammered. We had some personnel adjustments. Our systems were meant to transition credentials internally. There may have been a glitch. Voice cut in dead cold. Because what we're looking at isn't a system error, it's an attestation void. Your signer of record was Sandra McAlary. She is no longer active. No override is possible, and your general counsel cannot fulfill the dual key requirement without her. Wait, Devin said, there's no alternate pathway. You built your house on a 2-key lock, the voice snapped. And then you threw away one of the keys. That's not our problem. It's yours. Fix it, or we walk. Click. Devin looked up like he'd just been run over in slow motion. Across the room, Annika had her head buried in a printout of the original compliance schema. She turned a page, jabbed her pen into the table, and whispered, it's real. Clause 9a. She was designated the Keystone attester. Her credential tied to external verification by default. It's immutable once invoked. They can't override it. Someone stood up too fast and knocked over a full latte. No one moved to clean it. They just watched the foam creep toward a surge protector. At 8:52, Travis finally appeared, half-buttoned shirt, holding his phone like a weapon and his ego like a kite in a hurricane. Why the hell is legal losing its mind? He barked. It's a digital signature. Just reassign it. No, Devin said. We can't. We can't even spoof it. The buyer's side is watching the attestation chain in real time. They know it's invalid. They're ready to kill the deal. Travis paled. Then rehire her, temporarily, retroactively, whatever. She didn't resign, Annika said. She never triggered a termination protocol. We fired her, without decommissioning her system presence. The audit system still thinks she's required. She was required, Devin snapped. You signed off on the streamlining without checking the signer schema. At 8:55, the buyer's counsel emailed a final courtesy note. Subject, attestation chain breach 5 minutes to deadline body. Unless signer S. McAlary is reinstated with valid credential before 09:00, we will report failure to our committee. The diligence cycle will be considered incomplete. No funds will be released. The COO didn't speak, because now it was real, not theoretical, not a process hiccup. Not something he could link and post his way out of. He had fired the one person who could legally bless the $180 million deal, and there were 4 minutes left to fix it. Except she was gone, and the system wasn't bluffing. 8:59 a.m., 1 minute left. The war room was dead silent, save for the soft hum of monitors and the occasional dry click of someone's nervous jaw clenching. On the main screen, the diligence portal refreshed automatically. End cycle update triggered precisely 60 seconds before deadline. The page blinked once. Loaded. Final status. No attester. Below it, in smaller font, the sentence that would later be printed and included in at least 3 separate legal discovery binders. Compliance validation failed. Keystone signature absent. Submission expired. For a moment, no one moved. Even the air stopped circulating. Then legal snapped. Counsel stood, face flushed, tie askew, hands trembling as he slammed the heavy binder of printed attestations onto the conference table with a thud that echoed off the glass walls like a gunshot. Which of you, he hissed, looking directly at the board, authorized the termination of Sandra McAlary? Eyes darted. Papers rustled. Devon cleared his throat. One director checked his phone like it might contain an answer that would time travel him out of this moment. Travis stood too quickly. She was redundant, he said, smoothing his shirt, voice trying and failing to stay level. The role was operationalized. Legal didn't object at the time. Counsel turned, slow and surgical. You didn't ask legal. You walked her out under a soft purge and framed it as streamlining. You gave no notice, left no paper trail, and failed to consult anyone about signer dependencies. Travis tried to speak, but counsel wasn't done. You didn't just fire a staff member, Travis, he growled. Fired the only person with a legal credential to finalize our compliance chain. Do you understand what that means? Travis blinked. I thought the general counsel could. You thought wrong. Devon cut in, voice sharp now, chair scraping as he stood. Clause 9 locked her credential into the chain with non-transferable authority. It required dual countersignatures. She was the keystone. There is no override. You can't think your way past the document you never read. Across the room, someone opened their laptop to double-check the timestamp. 9:00:04. The clock had ticked over. The portal locked. The system was now in fail state. A second later, phones started vibrating, text messages, alerts, and a Teams notification from the buyer's lead partner. Deal status on hold. Compliance failure. Awaiting internal review. Then came the email. External counsel. Subject line all caps, attestation void. Travis turned pale, like he'd just realized the parachute he packed was actually a folded PowerPoint deck. I'll talk to them, he stammered. We'll explain. Get a grace period. Maybe we can reinstate her temporarily. Counsel shook his head. Reinstating someone doesn't regenerate a legal credential. You killed the only access, and unless she voluntarily steps in before noon, the entire diligence record is invalidated. You understand what that means for the acquisition? Another board member finally spoke. A soft-spoken woman from finance. The escrow, it won't trigger. No, Devon said flatly, it won't. Travis flailed for air. We can negotiate. No, counsel said again. You don't negotiate a missing attestation. You lose the deal, and possibly trigger a material breach clause depending on how the buyers decide to interpret the lockout. Someone else cursed under their breath. Chairs scraped. Pages flipped. The whiteboard with closing objectives scrawled across it was now a gravestone for the last 12 months of prep. Travis looked around, still trying to project calm, but now visibly sweating through his shirt. Let's just get her back. Offer her whatever she wants. Whatever she wants, Devon said with a grim laugh. You think this was an accident? And that was the moment the dam broke. The illusion of control, the carefully curated narrative of modernization, the smugness, all cracked open. Directors argued. Legal barked. One VP from Risk stormed out. IT sat slack-jawed, staring at their frozen screens, helpless to reboot a decision made 2 weeks too late. Travis stood alone in the center of the implosion, mouth open, caught somewhere between denial and dread, because this wasn't a PR mess. This was a legal sinkhole, and the woman they thought they could disappear had just pulled the bottom card out of their little Jenga tower. Quietly, precisely, irrevocably. The call came in at 9:16 a.m., not from legal, not from HR, not from anyone frantically trying to duct tape together the deal they just detonated. No, it was from Michael Rafferty, general counsel for the acquiring firm. A man whose voice could lower the room temperature by 10 degrees and whose emails read like cease and desist letters even when he was inviting you to lunch. Miss McAlary, he said, voice calm. Surgical, it appears your former employer has tripped over its own shoelaces. I sipped my tea. Seems so. There was a pause. The kind you don't fill unless you're sure you can survive what comes after. We'd like to speak formally, privately. I'm listening. 10 minutes later, I was on a secure video call with Michael, 2 of his lieutenants, and a deal advisor whose face never changed expression, not once. They didn't bother with small talk. No, how are you holding up? Oh, we heard what happened. They knew what happened, because they'd been waiting for it. Rafferty pulled up a file, time-stamped, archived, and titled simply, McAlary Pre-Audit Architecture Draft Summary, dated 3 weeks ago. I didn't blink. Your systems, he said, tapping the screen, were airtight, compliant, auditable. What your former employer did was reckless, borderline negligent. I tried to warn them, I said. They called it redundant. We call it elegant. Leaned forward slightly. Sandra, we'd like you to come on board as our internal compliance lead. Immediately and officially, he let it sit, no fluff, no hedging, and then full authority to restructure the audit chain. Set your own parameters, build your own team from scratch. I took a breath, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I wanted to enjoy the moment. This wasn't revenge, not really. It was an upgrade. I have conditions, I said calmly. Of course. First, I said I want carte blanche on compliance staffing. Anyone who stood by while Travis staged his little coup, they're gone. Anyone who fumbled the protocol when they knew better, gone. I decide who stays. I decide who goes. Accepted, Rafferty replied instantly. Second, I want my own reporting chain. No dotted lines to whatever executive mouthpiece is currently rehearsing apology speeches. Done. And third, I looked directly into the lens, to the heart of this moment I had quietly, methodically architected like everything else in my life. I want Travis nowhere near the transition. Not as a consultant, not in a courtesy meeting, not even as a name on an org chart. There was a pause. Understood, he said, nodding once. We'll take care of it. Another file popped up, an onboarding packet, already pre-filled with my name, my title, and the blank line for my signature. The irony was not lost on me. I'll sign after the meeting, I said. No rush, Rafferty said, though we both knew time was blood at this point. Do they know? I asked. Not yet, he replied, finally smiling, just a ghost of one. But they will. At the emergency board meeting in about 34 minutes, I nodded. They'll be expecting a miracle, he added. They'll get a mirror, I said. He chuckled softly. Then I'll see you in the next room. When the call ended, I sat back and stared at the document, not the offer letter. The architectural diagram I'd drafted 3 weeks ago, the one that mapped every compliance gap, every key misconfiguration, every human blind spot they never noticed because they assumed I was just a background process in human form. They never asked what I built. They just assumed it would keep running without me. But machines don't save you. People do. And I had just stepped to the other side of the table. Not as an employee, not as a whistleblower, as the one person with the blueprint. And now, the authority to decide who got to stay inside the building once the smoke cleared. I stood, picked up my blazer, noticed the old ID badge still sitting on my side table. I left it there, dead plastic, because I wasn't coming back. I was moving forward, and this time I was choosing the exits. The emergency board meeting was called for 10:30 a.m. sharp. They tried to make it look normal. Last carafes of coffee, a few sugar packets strewn like offerings to the gods of corporate damage control, and a tray of stale muffins that no one touched. The table was full, executives, directors, legal, finance, everyone except Travis, who hadn't shown up yet. Probably still trying to draft an apology that didn't sound like a LinkedIn post. The buyer's legal team arrived precisely on time. No emotion, no preamble, just 3 suits, 2 briefcases, a single-page amendment. One of them, middle-aged, silver tie, voice like gravel in cold water, set it down on the conference table with the kind of finality usually reserved for eviction notices and divorce decrees. This, he said, is a procedural amendment to resolve the attestation breach. It names Sandra McAlary as the reinstated attestation lead. The room froze. Devon leaned forward, eyes scanning. Reinstated as in rehired. The man didn't blink. Instated immediately. By mandate of the buyer's audit protection clause, someone from finance coughed. Legal stared. And then Travis, late and flustered, burst in wearing yesterday's suit and a smile 10 minutes past expiration. Okay, he said, panting slightly. Let's not make this dramatic. Sandra quit. She's gone. I'm sure we can sort this out with a handshake and a temporary reassignment. The buyer's counsel looked at him the way a surgeon looks at a broken scalpel. She didn't quit, he said flatly. She walked, because you forced her out without understanding the systems she built. You severed legal continuity without counsel review. And now your entire compliance infrastructure is legally unblessable unless she signs. Travis looked around the room for help. None came. He tried again. We can bring her in for contractor role. Short term. Get the signature. Then transition. Stop talking, Devon muttered. Buyer's counsel calmly flipped the page over and slid a pen across the table. This amendment is non-negotiable. Sandra signs or the acquisition is void. Period. Then the door opened, and I walked in, not in a pencil skirt and ID badge, not with a notebook and polite nod. I walked in with the buyer's representative credential clipped to my jacket. Their badge, their authority, their terms. The silence hit like a power outage. Travis's jaw clenched, then slackened. With them, he croaked. I met his eyes without blinking. I am them. He took a step forward like he wanted to protest. You abandoned your post, no, I said. I protected what you didn't understand. And then I waited for the fallout. The buyer's counsel motioned to the document. Miss McAlary, the floor is yours. I stepped forward, picked up the pen, and signed. The portal updated within seconds. The flashing red No Attester banner vanished. Every locked compliance file flipped to validated. A green bar stretched across the screen like sunrise. Attestation complete, someone whispered. Deal saved, funds cleared, silence, and then a quiet knock. A uniformed security officer entered and handed Travis a small envelope. He opened it. Inside, a formal notice of termination. Signed by the buyer's audit committee. Cause: gross negligence, willful obstruction, and failure to disclose risk. Please gather your things. The officer said, you'll be escorted out. Travis looked at me, desperate, confused, wounded. I didn't say a word, didn't have to. I watched him walk out, shoulders slumped, mouth twitching for defense that never came. When the door closed behind him, the room stayed silent. I placed the pen back on the table, straightened my blazer, and took my seat on the right side of the table this time. The deal was done, and so was he. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.